This is the Own It Show, where we tell stories of how everyday people made ownership theirs to create extraordinary success.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Own It Show, Coach Conversations. I am Justin.
And I'm Elise. Welcome to the show.
And guys, it's so crucial all the time when we talk about how do we react when we go into a different chapter of our lives. Not everything is always the same. Sometimes we are in corporate America and we lean over into entrepreneurship, or maybe we are in entrepreneurship and we pivot to a different business, or we've got something that we've always thought is our dream job and now we're leaning into something different. And how do we deal with that? How do we move? How do we react? And today I've got probably one of the and he doesn't know this yet, but one of the mentors in my life that I've looked up to as I was coming through my roles in strength and conditioning and sport performance. But Scott is an amazing individual. He's got his own podcast, Leave Your Mark podcast, as well as a gym in Reconditioning HQ in Montreal, Quebec, where just by chance, both Elise and I also have a residence. And so it's really exciting to have you on the show, Scott. And thank you so much for spending this time with us and being able to grace our guests with your presence.
My pleasure. I look forward to the conversation, and hopefully there's something of value in it for your listeners.
Scott, I'd love you to kind of dive in and tell us a little bit about where you came from. Like, what drove you to spend your life's work and invest your time in bettering other people?
It's interesting. I ask sort of that question, or I work my way through that sort of with the guests who come on my show, which you actually were just subjected to a little bit earlier ago. So I have a very circuitous route to where I got to. When I was a boy growing up, I had, the idea of a strength and conditioning coach and athletic therapist, which is what I do professionally. First of all, it wasn't even in my grill. The idea of what it was. I'm from Canada, so there really weren't very many examples of strength conditioning coaches when I was going to school and high school and playing football. I learned how to lift weights by reading Muscle Magazine or watching, the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive linemen who were, bench pressing and all this kind of stuff, or powerlifters back in the day. And so I would just lift weights all the time. I built my own gym in my basement with 2x4s and cold rolled steel, and actually built my own lat pull down when I was a kid. And used to have all these competitions for, who could bench 225 and then whatever it was beyond that. But I went to school. I basically found what I do by accident. I played football. I loved playing football. And so for me, playing football in university was something I hoped to do. I actually wanted to be, and that's the irony of being in a podcast, is I wanted to be a radio and television DJ back in the day. I wanted to really be a talk show host. And I actually applied to Algonquin College in Ottawa, which is where I grew up, to go into that. And I got in, which was actually a very tough program to get into. And my dad said to me, I'm not helping you pay for your education if you don't go to a university. And I didn't have a lot of money. So I kind of was like, okay, Dad, I guess I'll do what you want me to do. And I had 3 universities that were recruiting me to play football. And so I took one opportunity in Montreal at Concordia and actually didn't end up playing. I decided to stop playing. And Montreal's program was an exercise science program. And I had actually applied to a couple of phys ed programs. And the Concordia program had this exercise science department and had an athletic therapy option. And so I actually took that and discovered what an athletic therapist was, because up until then, all I knew they were was somebody who came and taped my ankles before practice, So I did that. I sort of discovered it. And then I sort of saw it as an aspirational opportunity to stay connected to sport. And so I worked a lot with the football teams. And at the same time, I always had a desire to lift weights. I always liked lifting weights. It was something that came easily to me and I enjoyed. And so I actually just ran into the National Strength and Conditioning Association by accident, probably in 1986 at a gym at the YMCA in Montreal. There was journals on the table and I was like, what's that? And they had a certification and I took the certification in 1989, became a certified AT and a certified strength coach, and then was sort of about to leave the profession. And I was working in a sports store. I was pretty despondent about not being able to get any work. And it was really tough to get good jobs. In the really strength conditioning world, there was no jobs. I mean, it didn't even exist. And my buddy who was running the athletic therapy program at Concordia with all the athletes was looking for an assistant therapist. So he came into the sports store and was talking about it. And I said, well, why don't you hire me as a strength coach AT? And he's like, oh, that's a cool idea. Maybe we can do this. So he applied for a government grant, and I got a computer from the government and $5,000 from the university. And I figured out how to work at the university and did a whole bunch of other jobs and kept working there and kept building a job in that. And that's how my career started. So I worked there. I don't know how long you want me to go on in my circuitous life, but that's how I discovered what I do, and did it in many different ways for the rest of my career.
That's an extremely powerful story, Scott. Thank you for sharing it with us. One of the things I'm really curious to understand, and we talk about this within the context of ownership, is every person who we have on this podcast lives in alignment with their passion and their purpose. How did you know what yours was? And particularly from what it sounds like a younger age as well.
Well, it's a great question. And honestly, knowing it subconsciously and knowing it consciously, I think are two different things. And when you ask the question, own it, I think it's probably when you ask me to define that at some future point, I think in some sense the discovery of that is really where you learn to own something, is because I think we all have sort of this innate subconscious compass that's pushing us around. And a lot of times we get off track because we're not paying attention to it much, or we listen to what the social world or our parents, in my case, told us to do, or what we thought we were supposed to do. And we find ourselves down there, and then all of a sudden something breaks or fractures in our life because we're probably not following our passion. And I think in some ways, I didn't always do that. I think in the beginning of my career, I was motivated, by a need to matter, and so for me, being in working with a team or with a performance program, and then eventually getting to the National Hockey League, for me, there was this sense that if I got there, if I climbed that mountain, I would somehow be something. I would be valuable to somebody. And I struggled with that in my personal love relationships as well. And so I think I struggled with my purpose for many, many years. I think I knew what it was, but I didn't really own it. And it was kind of funny. I'm probably leaping too far forward, but I read from this book, the book The Day We Were Born, that I read to Justin earlier, and it was a book that I discovered. I always liked astrology, but I was never possessed by it. And I picked this book up in a New York City bookstore, and I had just gotten divorced for the second time. And I used to have this saying taped to the top of my desktop, which is my favorite saying. It says, "Some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not?" And this was taped to my desktop, or for probably all of my college, university working career. And now I'm in New York. It's 1999, 2000. And I pick up the book and I flip to the page on Sagittarius 3, and I read, it always has a purpose statement. And I read the purpose statement. I'm like, wow, that really sounds like who I am inside. And then it always has a quote. And the quote was, "Some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not?" And I'm like, oh, I'm buying this book. So then I read some more, and I started to recognize that I really was the spirit of what this book was saying.
Sorry, Scott,
I've been, sorry,
not to interject.
cutting me off.
No, I want you to finish saying what it is you have to say. I just have to point out the irony that I had almost the same exact experience in an airport bookstore in New York City and purchased the same exact book.
No way.
Yes. Yes. So yes, please
That-
continue.
That changed the trajectory of your career.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, it's
So
crazy.
please continue on. I'm right here with you.
Yeah, it's crazy. So for me, I'm all about challenging convention, creating change, and inspiring people through my own actions and helping them be better human beings. So that's what I discovered over time was who I was. And so what I do when I do things, if it resonates with that, whether it's I'm a performance coach or I'm doing my podcast or I'm being a dad or what have you, am I doing it in that way? So segue to the podcast. I started the podcast really ostensibly because I always wanted to do this, to have conversations and to connect with people and to find out what their lives are about and to, impact people through that. So.
You talk about that need to matter, that need to be seen, if you will, and how it impacted you in really every aspect of your life. It wasn't compartmentalized to just your performance coaching career or your relationship or whatever it may be. How were you able to really grab a hold of that, understand it, and then go and make change and have it come in a different way?
Yeah, again, back to that sort of subconscious versus conscious approach. I think there was always I would recognize dissonance in me over time in different circumstances of my life, whether it was a personal relationship with somebody that I had decided to marry or a job that I was in. And I would always, something would start to eat at me that I was not being my true self or being able to express myself. But in the background of that, I also recognize that I think all of us, one of the things I've come to recognize over time is we all suffer from a sense of not being enough, wherever that comes from. And I was adopted. And having finally had children, I have a daughter. And when I finally had my daughter, I had to just sort of discovered and I recognized how much I bonded with my daughter in the first 6 months of her life. And I recognized that potentially whatever happened to me as an adopted baby, maybe there were scars in me that because of that, I felt some sense of not being adequate or not being valuable enough. And I think that probably precipitated or underpinned a lot of who I was as a 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old. My parents got divorced when I was 15 years old. That was challenging as well. So there was always these things. I was kind of a heavy kid, didn't sort of do well with the girls when I was younger and stuff. So I was always kind of questioning who I was, what my value was. And so for the first part of my life, being a football player was my identity. So, but then when I gave it up, I lost that identity. So who was I going to be now? Well, now I was going to be Scott Livingston, the therapist strength coach, and I was going to be damn good at it. And I was going to be the best at it, because that would mean I mattered to somebody, right? So then I was going to climb that mountain to become the strength and conditioning coach for the Montreal Canadiens. So, that's about as high as you can climb in strength coach dynamics and hockey in the world of Canada anyways. And it didn't satisfy me. I wasn't feeling some sense of accomplishment. I was feeling like, well, what's the next thing I got to do? So probably around when I hit 50 years old, I actually bumped into some people who were doing some really high quality mindset work. And I started on my mindset journey. And that's really where my unconscious became conscious. And I started to recognize, what was my real purpose and who did I want to be and how I was going to express that.
And what is your real purpose today, if you had to define it?
Well, to me, it's to create change, challenge convention, and inspire others through my own actions. So I love whatever I do. I'm not somebody who likes status quo. I like, can I do it more efficiently, more effectively? Can I create change in an environment? Can I challenge conventional thought or conventional wisdom around things? My wife and I teach a program called reconditioning, and fundamentally it's a flip chart on really how people look at human movement and function and performance and all these different things, because I don't really agree with the systematic approach to it now in the silos of therapy or conditioning or whatever. So, that's just who I am. And then when I started my podcast, it's the same expression that I put into that as well.
I want to go back to what you talk about in identity shifting, and really talk about just climbing these mountains, setting after I'm going to be this best therapist. Then you got there, and then the mountain's empty at the top. I'm going to be the strength coach for Montreal Canadiens. I'm going to get to that mountain. I got there. There's nothing left for me. The moment that you started leaning into your mindset work of creating this subconscious need to be to matter and to express yourself, and changing into the conscious space of being comfortable in your own skin, knowing your value, knowing your purpose, what impact did that have on you, the work you do, and the relationships you have?
Yeah, it's a great question. In my mindset journey, one of the, there are lots of lessons learned through it, but one of the concepts that the people that I learned from talked about was an idea of object referred versus self-referred. And object reference really is that you do everything to achieve something or to get something or to, have something. And I had always felt a sense of, vacuous, disconnection with that. I would do it and it would never, whether I got the watch or the car or the house or the job, or it was never really satisfying. So recognizing what self-reference was and what, connecting to the process of your own personal growth and your spiritual growth was really, I think the precipitator for me changing and how I now see myself, and I'm imperfect in it completely, as we all are, is just I try, when I do things, to always ask myself, why am I interested in doing this? What is it serving within me, and what is it serving to my community or to my family or to the people that I love, and how does this connect with who I am, instead of, I'm just going to do this because socially it's a cool thing to do, or people say it's the best thing to do, or what have you. Like, I probably could have taken different pivots in my life, and I could probably have earned 4 or 5 times as much as I earn now, simply in order to have the shiny bauble. And instead I've decided I wanted to create a certain kind of life for my child, for me, for my wife, and have the patience, to coin and consistency to deliver on things that really mean and matter to me. Maybe not to see the revenue that it can generate now, but maybe I'll see it in the future. But in the center of it, it's not about that. It's about me connecting with who I am. So.
And I know Justin asked how it changed your relationships, how it changed, those some of those things outside of you. But how would you say it changed within you on a day-to-day basis? Like, what was that shift? Tell us more about that internal piece of it.
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm an imperfect shape at this point, but I think what I check myself on, how it changed me, is I check myself way more now than I ever did before about why I'm doing things or what I'm doing. And I think in terms of how it is, because I think I missed sort of expressing that, but I think the way it has shaped my relationships with others is, there's 2 sides to that. I think some of my relationships are way better because people really understand who I am, but I think it also starts to limit the dimensions of who you connect with, because you start to ascend to a place where not everybody sort of feels the same way as you do about what you're doing. So you try to start to connect with people who have different kinds of viewpoints and different spirits of their centering. And so some of the things that were attractive to me in relationships when I was 42 do not attract me now at 58, so that's what's changed in me. I'm choosier about who I hang out with. I'm choosier about, what I do to in the work that I do and the projects that I take on and all those things. And I like spending more time with my lovely wife and with my little girl and all those kinds of things. So
You do it from a place of consciousness.
Exactly.
I want to kind of express to our audience here, because again, whenever we talk about the mindset piece, I've been there, Lisa's been there, I'm sure you've been there, where mindset is important. Mindset is pivotal to success. But you need mindset work. I don't need mindset work. Like my mindset is good. I'm mentally strong. I'm good at everything we're doing. We've all been there in our lives. And I want to kind of go back to these, if you talk about identity, the two versions of you, where you're an NHL strength coach, you've just been divorced twice, you're in New York City in 1990, to today in 2022, you're married with a daughter, you're an entrepreneur of your own business, you're a business leader, you're making impact and serving those in the space that you used to be in. What would you share with the audience or our listeners on the importance of that switch from subconscious to conscious, and the impact that it can have on your life, and the fullness that it can create and impact the success, not just object referred, but self-referred in where you're going?
I think if you can discover these things, if you can work through the challenges of what you're encountering in a way where you have a compass that you're actually connected to, the experiences become far more tangible. The timeline for discovery and shift becomes shorter. I've lived a very fulsome life, but I've also, I think, taken too much time at times to learn certain lessons. And I think to some degree, learning them a little bit earlier with a little bit better directionality of my mindset and understanding myself better, I could have made better decisions. I wouldn't change my life for anything, because I think it's been an extraordinary life that I've had the chance to live. But at the same time, I wish I knew why I was doing what I was doing earlier when I was in my life, and checked myself on it in a better way. Because I think I would have, I got divorced twice. And that was probably created hurtful experiences in the person that I was with. Did I need to go through that with those two people? Probably not. If I'd known myself better, I maybe would have chosen the partner I have now, the first time, but I didn't. And that was a mistake that I learned from. But sometimes we have to learn those lessons and experience them, and so that they create, the genesis of who you're going to become. I always admire, and it's one of the things that struck me about bouncing into you, Justin, is just I admire people who have kind of discovered these things earlier in their lives, because it allows you to create a different trajectory for yourself. For me, I've discovered a lot about myself maybe a little later than I wish I had.
It's really interesting what you're referring to, because as painful or as much suffering as it comes with, it sounds like you wouldn't give up those experiences, because it's allowed you to become who you are today. And it makes me think of the idea of the Matrix, Neo in the Matrix, where he has the option of the red pill or the blue pill towards the end of the movie. And for those who don't know the Matrix, he's living in a completely disillusioned world, while his real body, his material body, is sitting in a glob somewhere. And it's very similar to the same idea as Avatar. And he gets a choice of the red pill puts him into reality, and the blue pill keeps him in the disillusioned world that he's living in, that's ultimately not real. It's kind of the same thing as the shift between subconsciousness and consciousness, a very similar shift that you made. As painful and as much suffering as it takes to be able to go through those things and learn who we really are, it's the idea of taking that red pill and living in reality, living in a conscious space that allows us to ultimately seek that true fulfillment and happiness. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. I think we're all layered with different elements of baggage that, whether our parents provide it to us, or our social life provides it to us, or, the intersects of our initial experiences in school or whatever. All those things kind of are drivers of, and I love I love the book, The Four Agreements, because I don't know if you've ever read it, but effectively, you know, it talks really about the domestication of humanity. And so we are all domesticated in some way, shape, or form. And so as we start to learn that and understand it, then we can make better choices for ourselves. But then when you do learn it, understand it, life is really relatively simple. You know, we complexify it and create a lot of the drama around ourselves because you know, it gives us something to do, you know. when
Exactly.
you're when you're more spiritually centered.
Everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
what's a piece of advice that you would give our listeners to help them become more self-aware?
Well, I think the word self-reflection is sometimes over dramatized in the industry at large, but I think because I think it's misunderstood, but I think at the end of the day, do you actually contemplate why you're doing what you're doing? Do you have points of embarkation and debarkation from that sort of process of life where you actually sit down and think about, you know, where am I right now? What have I done? What did it satisfy who I am or not? Why not? And where am I going next? And why? You know, I don't think that question. I think we get over structurized in this planification models and in a lot of coaching dimensions where, you know, people want people to organize, and my wife and I do some life coaching stuff with people too, and you want to give people structures because structure helps them sort of understand where they're going. But at the end of the day, you have to have some kind of proposition where you ask yourself the question, why am I doing what I'm doing, and what is it feeding inside of me, and does it serve me? And when you start asking that question regularly enough, a lot of people avoid that question. You know, we work with a bunch of different people, and when I ask that question, a lot of people struggle with that question. You know, I don't know why I do things. So I think if I'm, you know, to your listeners, it's maybe a hard question to answer, and you might not be able to answer it now, but occasionally stop, sit down, and say, why the F am I here, and what am I doing? You know.
Scott, you work with, we haven't even gotten into who you work with, but you have such an impact on a lot of high-end athletes. You've had your fingerprints all over this year's Winter Olympics. You constantly have your hands all over these level of competitive athletes. How has that experience allowed you to serve those that you touch in a greater way?
Yeah, nice question. Well, you know, I think in our industry, you have all the technological elements of what we do, which by no means are unimportant. They're extremely important. You need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it and what you're trying to apply. But when you get to that strata of work, if you've created the experience sort of underpinnings of it, it ends up becoming really about the conversation we're having right now, and, you know, sort of helping the athlete or the person in front of you be a better person and help them see things for what they are and what they're experiencing. I have, to take an example, I have a young, well, he's mid 20s right now, athlete who's blind, and he's in the Paralympics, and came to me about 14 weeks ago with a back problem, was referred to me. We worked through the process of reconditioning his back and getting him to where he's got to go. But the reason I tell the story is a few days ago, you know, I reached out to him and the people that are working with him in his training camp right now. And I could tell, you know, in his voice that there was this sort of, there was a fear attribute, you know, because he's getting back and he hasn't skied like that in a long time. He's only run, I think, 8 races since he won gold medals in 2018. So he's really been sort of on the side. And we had a great conversation, himself, his guide, and his assistant there, or the strength coach that was working with him, around just him recognizing the volume of experience he has. You know, he's been to 2 Olympics, he's won medals before, or Paralympics, he's won medals before, he's experienced things. He needs to lean on that. And it was that, I won't go into the whole conversation, but it was the calm expression of where he was, what he needed to focus himself on, and why, that changed his mindset, that then allowed him. The next day I got an email and a text from everybody involved and said he had his best downhill day of the whole camp. And that's what, you know, I enjoy in my work, other than the fact that that the work that I do, I feel creates athletes that have more resilient lives and better post-career lives. But when it comes to my coaching, I think it's drawing on those things to help the athletes sort of center themselves. And it's funny because it has a kind of a lean on sports psychology, but I'm kind of not an anti-sports psychology person, but I do think it is part of everything we do with athletes. It's not a silo of, oh, go see the sports psychologist.
It's unique because I think Elise can lean on that a lot as well. As it comes from that inner energy mindset piece that she talks about all the time, where you can't just attack the mindset component. You can't just attack the physical component. You just can't attack the emotional component. It is all synergistic. It's all holistic in nature. And they subconsciously affect each other, and you can make it conscious.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, you know, it's not a coincidence that we're all sitting here today having this conversation, because we are all so much on the same page about that. You know, Scott, it's so clear that you live in what we call an ownership mindset, which is being able to live a conscious lifestyle, being able to ask yourself those hard questions, and being able to take the red pill and sign up for the reality of life, to look for something much deeper than those external things like the title or the money, or, you know, the cushy things of life that at times can feel so appealing. A question that our listeners really love to hear is, what to you would you say is your definition of ownership?
I think it comes back to, it's really recognition. You know, if you use a different term, it's recognition of who you are and who you want to express within yourself. And a good friend of mine, who's one of his definitions of success, is when your values match your behaviors. And I think it's your actual recognition of your purpose, if you understand it, and then do your behaviors and the things you do actually connect with who you are and your values and your purpose? Or are you doing this when you say you want to be this? So I think owning it is basically recognizing who you are, what you truly value, what is important to you, and then behaving that way, you know. And we're all to me, that's the definition of integrity. And we're all imperfect beings. We all struggle with the perfection of that. I don't think any of us ever does arrive at that, and it may be the journey of life. But at the end of the day, it's, do you ask yourself the hard questions? Am I behaving directly in association with my values, you know? And a lot of times we don't, you know.
It's amazing. It's so true. And when you come back to it and you really think about it, it is so simple, but yet it's not always easy to do. And it's something that can often steer us off that road and off that path. Scott, what are you working on right now that's super exciting to you?
Well, I mentioned it earlier. My wife and I teach a course called Reconditioning, which is really how you bring the two worlds of therapy and performance together in one powerful package. But it's really about, and we're investing more into bringing applied neurology into the program, because we've recognized how important the neurological system is in what we do. And to the point of what you just talked about, you know, everything, it's a global animal, the human body. It's not a singular thing. And so we need to understand all the different, you know, parts that go into creating why somebody moves well, doesn't move well, what they can do, what they can't do, all those kinds of things. So it excites me to be, my goal is sort of to change the landscape of human performance through that mechanism. So, you know, doing that excites me. This podcast, excites me because I love, you know, sitting down with people like yourself and just getting to know people. It's a selfish endeavor in the sense that I get to, you know, here you are just before your wedding, probably don't want to even be here talking to this old fellow when you could be preparing for your wedding. But, you know, I get to have an hour of your time, and I'm sure some of your guests would love to have an hour of your time in the next couple of days. And you know, it's a neat, cool thing to have conversations with really cool people. So that's what I'm doing.
Amazing. And where can people find you on social media, connect with you in a deeper way?
Well, the Leave Your Mark podcast is on pretty much every streaming service now. And then my handle on Instagram is King O'Pain, which comes from an old thing that some of the athletes at Concordia used to call me when I would inflict therapeutic pain upon them to make sure they were really hurt instead of just faking it. And then my Twitter handle is Built by Scott, and you can find me on pretty much every social channel under Scott Livingston if you just type it in. So
I love it. I love it. So guys, as you go forward, we know that you cannot get to those peak levels of success, what we deem success, if we're only object referred. It's going to leave us empty. It's going to leave us unfulfilled when we get to the top of that mountain. We've all been to the tops of whatever mountains we've sought out, and we've always got to the top and said, what's next? What else is here? Is this it? And instead, if we can shift ourselves from a subconscious to more of a conscious way of living, we can now become more self-referred. And that self-reference allows us to lead that life that we truly want, can find the successes of what we're truly looking for. And it starts with asking our question, why am I doing what I'm doing? And when we can get clear on that question, we can ultimately lead to that recognition of who we are. And when we know who we are, we can ultimately understand, do our values match our behaviors? And once we get clear on that, we can truly live in ownership, and we can truly find that level of success. Because what do we always say? Success is different. So own your different. And we'll see you next week.